The Wilson Center has nothing to do with the metro closure, but it is obviously making it difficult for the 300 people who accepted the invitation to be here, to get here. Fortunately, we have streaming video. See that camera back there? And to those of you who missed this in person, we're sorry, but we're moving right along. I'm Jane Harmon, the president and CEO of the Wilson Center, and delighted to welcome everyone to the, I guess I was going to say the 4 tenors, but now we're the 3 tenors plus 1, or I'm not exactly sure what the music metaphor is, but delighted to see everyone here. Also want to welcome Carlos Gianelli, the Uruguayan ambassador, who's in the audience. Many people from here, there he is. You can sit in the front, sir. Many people from various state departments, including ours, and a special shout out to my very, very dear friend Caroline Croft from the State Department. Also, and they will take over the program for me, we have 2 phenomenal program directors. To my immediate left is Paulo Sotero, who heads our Brazil program, and then we have, where's Cindy? Cindy is over there, who heads our Latin America program. The Wilson Center also has a Mexico Institute, and we're very proud of the fact that before it was cool, we were focused on Mexico and Latin America. Let me welcome the other people on the panel. Ambassador Liliana Ayalde, who is the U.S. Ambassador to Brazil. Ambassador Michael Hammer, who's the U.S. Ambassador to Chile. And the Chargé d'Affaires, Brad Frieden or Fredden? Fredden. Of the U.S. Embassy in Uruguay. And finally, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South America and Cuba, Alex Lee. This is an exciting time in U.S.-Latin America relations. A few days from now, as most people know, President Obama will travel to Cuba, the first U.S. president to visit in almost 90 years. This is obviously an historic time in U.S.-Cuba relations following the announcement in December 2014 of the normalization of relations between our countries. From Cuba, the president will go to Argentina, another country in the throes of change and where our bilateral relationship has suffered many ups and downs in recent years. We look forward to a greater U.S.-Argentine partnership under the new administration in Buenos Aires. And P.S. for me, my own daughter spent a college semester in Buenos Aires. I visited it many, many times, and hopefully Cindy will invite me back. Delighted to. The president's trip, especially to South America, comes at a difficult time for that part of the world. Well, I would say a mixed time for that part of the world. Brazil is in the midst of a deep political and economic crisis. More from Paulo soon. Other countries in South America are facing difficulties related to the economic slowdown in China and the fall of commodity prices. But U.S. diplomatic and economic relationships with Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay are deep and still positive and likely to grow in importance. We look forward to hearing not only about the numerous challenges in South America, but also about the numerous opportunities for deeper engagement and friendship, and that is something the Wilson Center is committed to. Not only committed to making it happen, but also committed to explaining it and making sure that policymakers understand the things they could do in all of these countries, including ours, that would make that relationship deeper and better. So finally, we send a virtual greeting to our U.S. Ambassador to Argentina, Noah Mamet, who happens to be a close personal friend of mine. He is from Southern California, and while I served for Congress during 9 terms, we became friendly as he worked first for and then with Dick Gephardt, who was the Democratic leader in the Congress for a long time. We had hoped that Noah would join today's panel, but he has homework to do because the president will soon visit his country, and we're grateful to Alex Lee for being a backup hitter today. So now it's my great pleasure to turn this over to 2 of our stars, Cindy and Paulo. Welcome.
Great. Jane, thank you very much for those introductory remarks that set the stage, I think, perfectly. What we'll do is have brief opening remarks from each of this morning's panelists. Paolo and I will ask one or two questions to start off the discussion, and then we'll turn it open to those of you in the audience. So please, Liliana, you are first.
The easiest one, right?
Right.
Bom dia. Thank you, Jane and Cindy and Paulo, for this invitation, this opportunity to talk about Brazil. And I also take this opportunity to thank you for everything you do with the Institute to have these conversations and to get to know a bit more about Brazil. There's enough going on right now. It is a difficult moment, and I'm sure that many of you would want me to speculate or interpret, but I'm going to leave the political analysis to those that are the experts and have been, like Paulo, who's been following Brazil. That doesn't mean that we don't follow it. I certainly follow it not only on a daily basis rather than an hourly basis. Situation is quite critical politically, economically. The Lava Jato, the scandal it has many tentacles. But what I wanted to do is actually take advantage of this opportunity to talk about what you don't hear, which is the bilateral relationship, which is at a very good place. Despite the distractions, and by no means is I want to be sensitive to the moment in time. There's lots going on, but we have, since June, when our two presidents met here in Washington, they developed a very intensive bilateral agenda, a framework, which has, we've been actually lucky that we've had it to work from. And it spans everything from commercial to energy to science and technology. And in fact, we're doing a lot. We're very busy right now, but just to give you an example, at the end of this month, we will have a CEO forum, which is 12 CEOs from Brazil and 12 CEOs from the US getting together. They're coming to Washington, meeting with the Minister of Commerce and with our Secretary Pritzker, making recommendations to government. The lead economist from the White House and Penny Pritzker will be the hosts. We've got that going on. We've got the Minister of Ports coming. We're trying to take advantage of this moment to talk about infrastructure. There are lots of opportunities for different concessions that are going to be that are out or that are going to be let out that we believe that our U.S. companies are particularly well positioned for. We have an ATAC, which is an agreement on trade and economic cooperation that had not met since 2013. It's meeting at the minister level with Ambassador Froman. That's happening at the end of the month as well. We've had a number of bilateral engagements since June, spanning everything from internet governance to energy to climate change. Human rights, things that we hadn't had before, that now we're getting into very deep conversations and trying to understand each other's positions. So all of that is happening. It's a very robust agenda. As we believe that there are lots of opportunities, particularly on the business side. It is a tough moment for a number of our companies. We have $100 billion in bilateral trade. We could be doing more. Our businesses are there for the long run. We've got companies that have been there 60, 70, 80, 100 years. I meet with them regularly. Of course, they're concerned about the economy. They're watching it very closely. In some cases, it's a mixed bag. Some of the companies have had a bigger impact, whether it's the automobile industry, but others, such as the health sector, are doing very well. And so it's kind of a mixed bag. At the same time, it's a moment for investment. Some U.S. investors are looking to Brazil to invest, to acquisitions and so forth. So it is a mixed bag. It is complicated. And as U.S. ambassador, I do see so many opportunities because we have so much in common. Two largest economies in the region, two large democracies. We have a big middle class that are going to continue to, not necessarily now, but it's going to pick up. And so we have a longer, medium and long-term view, and we believe we have lots of opportunities. So navigating this juncture is complicated. I will not minimize it. Every day, every hour, there are developments that we have to be very conscious of. But I guess what I want to leave with the message is, despite all those distractions, the relationship is good. It's been elevated. We were able to get into subject matters that we were not able to get at before. And we have the mechanisms that are in place. I can go through a list of scheduled engagements that are already planned. They have been happening. We have a number of ministers coming to Washington. Those are scheduled and confirmed. So we're in a good place in the bilateral relationship. So we have to balance it with the reality of the economy, which is of course preoccupying, and of course the political crisis, which is very complex. But it is a democracy, just like we have our own challenges here. It is messy and complicated, and we just have to be aware of that context.
Yeah, I would like to ask you a couple of questions, but before I do that, I'd like to say something that is precisely along the lines of what you just said. The crisis is showing something, a resilience in Brazil-U.S. relations. That is quite surprising. Two issues recent. In December last year, the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris, where U.S. and Brazil really cooperated for what was a positive outcome. And this happened when this crisis was already really taking place and increasing. The other one is the recent episode of Zika, or ongoing episode of Zika, that showed that the Brazilian and American public health doctors really cooperate. There is real good work happening. So when it comes to concrete issues, I'm reminded of something that your predecessor in Brazil and now Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Tom Shannon, said that Brazil-U.S. relations are more, interests are more convergent than they are divergent. And the crisis is testing that. Now, looking to the future, you mentioned the CEO forum here. Obviously, the Brazilian economy is an enormous problem right now. The economy should contract another 4% this year, depending on decisions that are being made right now. What do you see in your contacts with CEOs from both countries? In what is possible to do in an economy, and I refer to the Brazilian economy, that obviously is suffering the consequences of the exhaustion of a certain economic model that gives the state too much of a role and has really prevented investments from both Brazilian and foreigners into Brazil. What are the possibilities here when you talk to CEOs from Brazil, from the United States, on what they think is possible to do under current circumstances?
Well, Paulo and Ambassador Ayalde, if I could make a suggestion, perhaps we'll hold that question, and that'll be the first one that we'll address when we come back to the Q&A. We can just take the opening presentations and come back to that. Ambassador Hammer.
Well, thank you very much, Cindy. Thank you, Jane and Paolo and the Wilson Center for putting this together. Also, a special shout out to Metro, because it enabled me to add several thousand steps to my Fitbit. So, which is my New Year's resolution. In any case, I thought I'd start just basically by framing sort of where we are with the Chile-United States relationship, going back to President Bachelet's visit with President Obama back in June of 2014, very shortly after she resumed office for a second term. In that meeting, and what's very interesting about that is that many of the things that were discussed there are things we've actually followed up over the next 2 years now as she hits her midterm point and as we look forward to the next 2 years. But I remember the discussions on advancing peace and security, and we know how strong Chile has been as a partner in peacekeeping and in terms of their commitment in Haiti for over a decade, and then since have now agreed to deploy peacekeepers to the Central African Republic and are looking to help Colombia when the time comes to implement their peace process with perhaps future peacekeeping contributions. Energy was a big component of that visit as well when Secretary Moniz and Minister Pacheco signed a memorandum of understanding to increase energy cooperation. And as you probably well know, the Atacama Desert provides perhaps the best solar energy in the world, and we have tremendous U.S. interest, partially financed by OPEC, and over $1 billion in loans for U.S. companies who are now very strongly making their presence felt, but also in other non-conventional renewables. You also have and had a very good discussion on education. Clearly, we are promoting the 100,000 strong. My daughter, in fact, she did an exchange from Syracuse University and went down to Santiago, so we count her as one. But definitely something that the president launched actually when he was in Santiago in 2011, and that is something that we can all talk about, what an important initiative it has been to promote those deeper educational and people-to-people exchanges in the hemisphere and trade. Back then, who knew we'd actually get to an agreement on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of which Chile, as you well know, is a member along with Peru, Mexico, Canada in the hemisphere. And now we're in the process of looking forward to ratification, hopefully soon as that process moves forward in Chile and hopefully here as well in the United States. So for us as a mission, our daily challenge in Chile is, well, how do we even go further than what we're already doing in terms of working with Chile as a partner to tackle sort of the global challenges, whether it's climate change, and Paulo is absolutely right that there was a very significant agreement reached in Paris, and the Chileans have been very helpful and looking forward, in fact, working with Secretary Kerry on Our Ocean Conference, which hopefully you've heard something about, but Secretary Kerry launched it in 2014, and then the Chileans took it on and held it last year in Valparaiso, and the next one will be in September this year. But it's something something we should all care about, is how to protect our oceans. And tied to that, something I never knew before going to Chile is the amount of work we do on what we call science diplomacy. On astronomy, when you have 70% of the world's super telescopes will be located in that Atacama Desert, when you have glaciology, volcanology, seismology, whateverology, we're doing it in Chile. And so it's really fascinating work. It's also, again, something that we don't think about very commonly in terms of U.S. diplomacy, but those scientific collaborative arrangements bring our countries closer together and looking to solve some of the core issues like climate change. It's the kind of thing that you want to see. Let me say a couple words sort of the strategic frame as we see it from Chile, and I don't want to steal any of Alex's thunder, and I know he's mostly going to talk about Argentina, but the president is going to Cuba this week, and I cannot tell you the level of enthusiasm and support for that bold policy decision to normalize as it was felt by the Chilean people, Chilean government, and in removing what we all know was a tension point in U.S. relations with the hemisphere. And it's good for folks back here in Washington to sort of grasp that. And I think as ambassador in Chile, I can see, even among regular people that come up and say, well, it was about time and it's the right thing to do. And really, it's quite significant. But also, as with the president going to Argentina, the Chileans are very optimistic and looking forward to their new relationship with Argentina under President Macri. And we've seen a number of very deep engagements already between Chile and Argentina. You may be familiar that they have a joint peacekeeping battalion that's never been deployed, the Cruz del Sur, and already all kinds of discussions about whether they help in the Colombia peace process or they go elsewhere. But things that before were unthinkable in terms of reconnecting of the energy relationship, particularly in gas, between Chile and Argentina, given what's happened in the past. Now all of a sudden Chile is exporting gas to Argentina. Who would have thunk it? But it's happening. But it's a positive, and I think that
Chile to Argentina.
Chile to Argentina.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. President Bachelet just told a CODEL and they nearly fell off their chairs.
Really?
But yeah, that's actually happened now. It's not Chilean gas, it's from Trinidad and Tobago, but nonetheless, the pipeline that originally was supposed to be feeding Chile, which became a very sore point when that did not happen now. But it just goes to show that there's a really close and growing relationship and very bullish sort of sense that the change in Argentina is really going to be dynamic and helpful for the rest of the hemisphere. And of course, you all know that Chile is one of the Pacific Alliance countries, with Peru, Colombia, and Mexico. And I see our former ambassador in Mexico entered the room. Tony, great to see you. Maybe should have stayed a little bit longer, but hopefully we'll get Roberta down there soon. In any case, the Pacific Alliance, something that is progressing. You may have heard about the Chileans' effort to sort of bridge Pacific Alliance with Mercosur. I mean, they see themselves as a bridge nation, obviously want to be engaged and to make sure the Pacific and Atlantic of Latin America are connected. But what also surprised me, and oftentimes we don't think about here, is how much Chile is a Pacific nation and how much they see themselves looking outward towards the Pacific, and hence, their participation in TPP also a significant and signature achievement. And lastly, what I'll say is that the visa waiver program, in Chile being the only country currently in Latin America that benefits from being part of the program, has really solidified the relationship and is a badge of honor for the Chileans, but also has increased the travel of Chileans by 20% to the United States. Not as much Americans to Chile, but also about 8% increase. And so those people-to-people ties, which we know, bring us together and bond, and bring the countries together, are significant and important. And whenever we can expedite, travel, business travel, particularly when you have a country of 3,000 miles in length, when it's cumbersome to come to Santiago, even though we of course always like to see people at our consular section, it's something that's really been fantastic and helped to even deepen business ties. So anyway, I'll stop there. I'm sure you'll want to talk a little bit about what the domestic situation is like. I'll just say, yes, there have been campaign finance reforms, but it's affected parties from across the political spectrum, which goes more to point to the deficiencies in the way campaign finance was being done and the lack of laws which are now being rectified, than a real serious problem with corruption, although the Chileans tend to be very critical of themselves, and it's a good characteristic, but overall people are quite confident, certainly U.S. businesses. We've seen just very recently Walmart has decided to invest another $300 million. They were already in Chile, but add to their presence there. Pfizer with a sizable investment, Abbott Labs as well, and a whole slew of course, the energy companies that I mentioned before. So there's still a great interest in establishing and in promoting further U.S. investment in Chile. And of course, we're trying to motivate Chilean investment to the United States, and that's something we work on. And we have the Select USA Summit, which Commerce leads, and which will be another opportunity to bring a number of Chilean firms here to get them to create more jobs for the United States, and obviously beneficial to the Chilean economy as well. And yeah, we could go on, but obviously they're also suffering from commodity price decrease, and so their economy is struggling somewhat. It's still growth. They project 2% or slightly under 2% growth for this year, but it does impact their ability to, again, project when their budgets shrink. Then that makes it tougher for them to be the kind of leader that we want to see on the world stage, but they still are very committed multilateralists and look forward to continue to work with the United States. I'll stop there.
Great.
Thanks.
Ambassador Hammer, thank you. Chargé Fred.
Thank you. The title Chargé is kind of an awkward one. I always explain it to people as all of the responsibility of an ambassador and none of the glory.
There's glory?
Well,
just wait.
I've been doing it for 15 months, and in in that regard, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Donald Trump, because for the longest time, the first question I would get whenever I would go to a meeting or a diplomatic reception is, when is your ambassador going to get here? When is your ambassador going to get here? 4 or 5 months ago, that changed to, could Donald Trump really become president of the United States? So it's just to say that our politics here fascinate people I know all over the world, but certainly in Uruguay. I'm going to keep my remarks short, hopefully just throw some things out there to provoke discussion. Let me start with 3 things that you may have heard about Uruguay. It's the only country in the Western Hemisphere to have legalized marijuana, abortion, and gay marriage. It is the least corrupt country in Latin America, according to Transparency International. And you may or may not know that Uruguay accepted 6 former detainees from the Guantanamo Bay detention facility, and it is so far the only Latin American country to do so. 3 things you might not have known about Uruguay. Some of it is trivia. It's the southernmost capital in the Western Hemisphere. Beats out Buenos Aires by a few miles. The reason I say that is because this room has a very deep knowledge of the geography of Latin America, but when I told people I was going to Uruguay, I got this blank look, and a couple of people said, Hawaii? And I said, no, Uruguay, between Brazil and Argentina. But Uruguay it's about the size of Florida, but it has only the population of San Diego County, so relatively sparsely populated, a lot more cattle than people. It has a GDP about the size of Maine or Idaho. And it's one of only 20 full democracies in the world, according to the Economist. And of those 20, Uruguay is number 19, and the United States is number 20. And I often wonder why that is. And it might be because Uruguay gave women the right to vote before we did. Point being that this has always been a very progressive country. Things that you should know about Uruguay. They produce 90% of their electricity using renewables, wind, hydro, solar, biomass. They sit next to us now on the UN Security Council, beginning in January for a 2-year non-permanent membership. And they're the largest or second largest, depending on when you look, per capita contributor to UN peacekeeping operations in the world. It's Uruguay's strategic location, its political stability, and the duty-free regime that the government has set up make it a very attractive distribution hub for exports to the region. It's not a large domestic market, so a number of American companies have found, though, that they can set up business there, and they have long-term political. It's a very predictable legal and business environment, and a nice place to live. 3 things that worry Uruguayans and worry us too. Only 40% of public school students graduate from high school. There's a real crisis in education. The homicide rate in Montevideo is higher than Los Angeles, and it's more than double that of New York, which it's still a safe place compared to most capitals in Latin America, but for Uruguayans, it's been quite a shock to see the increase in crime. And like other countries in the region, after more than a decade of 5% annual growth, the economy has slowed to a crawl. They're still in positive territory, but just barely. Inflation recently hit 10%. And Uruguay finds itself left out of the world's emerging free trade zones. The three, you should notice the theme of threes here, I'm sure. The three tenets of our policy toward Uruguay: shared values. We work with Uruguay to promote democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. We don't work on Uruguay, we work with them. They've got the democracy thing down pretty well, so we work with them in the UN. We work with them quietly to help promote human rights in countries in the region where that's an issue, and of course in the places where they have peacekeepers deployed. Our second goal is trade and investment, and the focus is on creating good jobs in both countries and creating jobs that are industries that are environmentally sustainable. And our third goal is education and social inclusion, because as I said, the education system is in a bit of a crisis. We have a memorandum of understanding with Uruguay on social inclusion that focuses on the primarily on the Afro-Uruguayan population, on women and girls, and on LGBT community. Again, this is a partnership. We're not doing things to Uruguay, we're doing things with Uruguay. I just want to close by mentioning former President Pepe Mujica, who became something of an international rock star for his reputation for being the world's poorest president. He drove his Volkswagen to work during his entire tenure. He lived on a small farm with his wife and three-legged dog, who was quite famous. The thing about Pepe Mujica, the most significant thing I think, in terms of U.S. policy, he had leftist cred. He was a former Tupamaro guerrilla. There was no doubting that he was authentically from the left, but here we embraced him, and the message, we embraced him because he was democratically elected, because he respected human rights, and he observed the rule of law. And I think perhaps the biggest, the most important thing we have done by embracing him is to show countries like Venezuela that it's not whether you're left or right. The United States can have great relations with a country that's run by a former guerrilla, as long as he's elected democratically and is committed to the rule of law, which certainly was the case. And I think that was a very, very important message and a contrast to some of the other countries in the region, and certainly a demonstration of that those who say that the United States can't work closely in partnership with leftist governments are absolutely wrong. I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you, Chargé, Ambassador, stand-in, whatever. I'd like to recognize Chilean Ambassador Juan Gabriel Valdez, who has joined us, and also recognize and thank the amazing cooperation of the Latin American Program staff and Brazil Institute staff, Eric Olson, Associate Director of the Latin American Program, Veronica Colon, Program Associate, Karina Peña, Program Assistant, Michael Darden, Program Associate of the Brazil Institute. Obviously, this is a team effort without which this would not be possible. Alex, you are, I think, more than a stand-in for Noah Mamet. We're obviously disappointed that he couldn't join us, but understand that he's got a pretty long to-do list at this point. But you are in this key position working on both South America and Cuba to talk about the president's visit. So not to distract you from your prepared remarks, but there's obviously a lot of interest in what you might be able to contribute. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much to the Woodrow Wilson Center and Cindy and all for this opportunity. I'm going to focus my little talk on Argentina, but happily to do questions about the visit in general afterwards. But the main point I want to get across is how enthusiastic we are with the visit of the president to Argentina. because it really represents a profound shift in a relationship that we value and have been somewhat frustrated in the past, but now see remarkable opportunities to work bilaterally and regionally together with a very constructive partner. And this was all made possible by a rather unique set of elections, which really, for the first time, an opposition party won the presidency, Buenos Aires province, and the city of Buenos Aires. And it was also the first time that the country held presidential debates. And the winner of that contest, President Macri, came into office pledging domestic change and reintegration of Argentina with the world. And that's something that we really welcome. And he's already delivered on so many reforms that it's hard to believe that he's only been in office for approximately 3 months. So let me just start off with a couple of examples of what he has done in his first 100 days. And then I'll talk a little bit about the areas that we would like to cooperate bilaterally and multilaterally in the future. Starting with the political front, we've seen a dramatic shift in Argentina's foreign policy. President Macri has been clear that he envisions Argentina playing a constructive role and a constructive leadership role in the region and in multilateral fora. And we've already seen that play out in discussions preparing for G20 involvement. We've already seen expressions of support for the OAS and the UN. And his architect behind all of this is his supremely well-qualified foreign minister, Susana Malcorra, who was Ban Ki-moon's former chief of staff, to lead those efforts of engagement. To give you a few examples, the new administration has supported international efforts against human rights violations in Burundi, North Korea, and Syria. It abandoned Argentina's MOU with Iran. It committed to rebuilding its capacity to deploy UN peacekeepers and will send a humanitarian mission of white helmets to Jordan for refugee assistance near the Syrian border. It has already expressed great interest in supporting the Colombian peace process, both separately and perhaps together with Chile. The new Argentine government has demonstrated a strong leadership in the climate change negotiations, and it supported the Paris Agreement, which President Macri has vowed to sign next month on April 22nd with other world leaders. My colleagues here have noted the enthusiasm that Argentina's immediate neighbors have felt towards this new government. And we've seen that enthusiasm, whether it's Chile, Paraguay, or Uruguay, expressed quite enthusiastically. At the same time, the government has moved rapidly and admirably, taking on Argentina's structural economic challenges and imbalances with the goal of restoring inclusive and sustainable economic growth. Within a week of taking office, Finance Minister Pratt Gay engineered the lifting of capital controls and the unification of exchange rates. No easy thing. The administration is also revamping the National Statistic Agency to provide credible data. It started eliminating energy subsidies while keeping safety nets to protect the most vulnerable population. It has also begun to take steps to remove trade barriers so all firms, whether Argentine or foreign, can compete fairly. President Macri has expressed desire for Mercosur to move forward with the EU trade negotiations and to develop closer ties with the Pacific Alliance, and we both welcome these developments. Granted, there is much work to be done. Time will be needed for some of these reforms to bear fruit. The IMF has projected that Argentina will see a mild recession this year. The government is still facing some very tough challenges, like bringing down an inherited 7% fiscal deficit and high inflation, which is probably around 30% right now, with the goal of reducing it to single digits in 3 years. So it is tackling these, but it's trying to do it in a gradual but steady fashion, which I think is reassuring to Argentines and those in the international community. I would be remiss not to also highlight an extremely significant development, and that is Argentina's resolution of the long-standing bond holdout dispute. The Macri administration has made significant progress in reaching a preliminary agreement with 85% of the creditors, including the largest ones, which are now subject to congressional approval. And we hope that all parties will be able to put this issue behind them soon, because if they do, it will open up avenues to support Argentina's development plans by encouraging financing that is very much needed and will help Argentina normalize relations with the international financial community. Our embassy tells us that the prospects for the Congress to approve this measure seem quite promising, and this is a very good and positive development. At every turn, the Macri administration has expressed desires to have constructive relations with international partners, including the United States. And you could see that in President Macri's participation at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which was basically Argentina saying, we are back, we want to engage with the world community to work and address challenges and opportunities. President Macri and his team held dozens of meetings with public and private sectors, including with our Vice President Biden. And in his discussion with Vice President Biden, they covered a whole variety of areas identifying for bilateral cooperation, with a focus on trade, investment, energy and science and technology cooperation, cooperation on human rights in multilateral fora, security, and education. And all of these elements are very much in the President's toolkit when he will be going to Argentina for discussions with the President Macri. They are a remarkable set of commercial opportunities for foreign companies, including US companies. And like in Brazil, we've had a large number of American companies, some of them for decades being established in Argentina. And collectively, we estimate that they contribute to about 20% of the country's GNP. So it's a significant presence. And they have stayed in Argentina through the country's ups and downs because of the country's potential, human capital, size of its economy, prospect of remarkable energy resources, and a immense human talent that is ready to be tapped. And so we see great interest in the international financial community and in companies very interested in investing in the new Argentina. And there have already been announcements by American companies, including $1 billion by Coca-Cola and $500 million by Dow. And if Argentina reaches an agreement on the bond holdouts, it's easy to predict that there'll be far greater expressions of investment in the country. On energy, President Macri's new energy ministry is working hard to reform the energy sector and develop all of Argentina's energy resources, especially in renewables. And although Argentina has some of the best sun and wind opportunities in the world, renewables only represent 1% of the country's energy mix. There's a new law that requires that number to go up to 8% by next year. And so there are a lot of companies that are very interested in those possibilities. There's also a lot that we can do together to promote entrepreneurship, discover new technologies, leverage our scientific know-how. This was actually, scientific cooperation was one of the areas that we managed to salvage during a more difficult bilateral relationship. And so there's actually a platform there for us to build upon for future opportunities. And so we must redouble our efforts on working on climate change and oceans conservation to address our global energy challenges. Another area on the bilateral agenda is going to be security, law enforcement cooperation, which is an area that the Argentine government has reached out to us, and we're in the process of figuring out how we can support their requests for assistance and how we can develop a true law enforcement partnership and to provide expertise, but also provide channels for secure law enforcement exchange of information. Another area that we're going to be focusing on is expanding our educational ties. There's already a well-established bilateral educational relationship, but we want to expand that, and our embassy, under the leadership of Ambassador Mamet, has been particularly vigorous in expanding initiatives in the educational area. Clearly, with all of these opportunities for both governments to cooperate, there's still going to be areas of differences. But what has fundamentally changed is the spirit in which both governments approach their differences, both countries approach their opportunities. And so we feel very privileged that President Obama is going to basically force feed the cooperation between both countries. But we're also very lucky that the Argentine government has sent us here to Washington a very able ambassador, and then Ambassador Martin Lusteau. And I hope that those in this room that wish to build cooperative relationships with the new Argentina reach out to him. So we very much welcome having this constructive partner. We realize that Argentina is going to play a leadership role in the region, in the hemisphere, and globally. And this is good for us because we need a constructive partner to work with in a world that threats no boundaries, whether it's a small mosquito carrying the Zika virus or transnational criminal organizations. Being able to cooperate constructively with a country of Argentina's potential and leadership is really a welcome and refreshing change. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Alex. Thanks to all of the ambassadors who made such useful and interesting comments. I also want to mention that Tony Wayne used to be U.S. Ambassador to Argentina as well as Mexico, the post for which I think he's mostly known, but he has in his heart a little Argentine. So perhaps we can turn to Paulo's original question and start with that. If Liliana, you want to answer the points that Paulo raised, we'll start with you.
Just very quickly on Zika, the United States is the go-to partner, and I think just like in Chile, the whole science diplomacy is very robust. It's been going on for years. Scientists are connected in a very real way. And so when Zika erupted. Dilma immediately talked to President Obama, and that has generated an even a more consolidated partnerships of institutes that were already working with each other. So on this epidemic, we have the NIH connected with Butantan working on the development of vaccine. We have other institutes such as Osvaldo Cruz working on diagnostics. We are getting more concise data on the association of microcephaly and the virus, and Guillain-Barré and the virus. So this research that will benefit not only Brazil, not only the region, but the world. And so these partnerships are very tight and very robust. So and that's ongoing. It will not be affected by the current situation. In fact, resources are being headed that way, in national as well as international. In terms of the CEO Forum and the opportunities, so they make recommendations. There's some recommendations that have not taken as much traction because they are politically probably very difficult to such as the reform of the tax code. The Custo Brasil and everything that companies need to, all the hoops that they need to go through in terms of tax requirements is a heavy cost. That is a political issue. So that the reform of the tax code will not happen now. However, there are things that may be low-hanging fruits that they're recommending that can be worked on, and that needs to continue. So it's a dialogue. Maybe the timing is not right, but that needs to be put on the table. But there are opportunities. And so out of the CEO Forum, something that's come out very strongly is the opportunities for investment in infrastructure. And in the past, we have not had as many U.S. companies from the infrastructure side of involved in Brazil, because Brazil has very robust and strong companies that have been working in Brazil and all over the world. As a result of the Lava Jato, a lot of these companies have been affected, and that has generated all this opening. So U.S. companies bring a seal of approval in terms of governance, and so the government is reaching out to us to see, okay, what can we do? How can we change the bids? How can we change the concession to attract U.S. companies? And that's the process we're in. So at the CEO Forum, there is a memorandum of understanding being signed by the Ministry of Commerce and the Casa Civil and our counterparts here to commit to every year having this event. We also have an inventory of different concessions that will be coming out on ports, waterways, airports, railways, and there's a lot going on in terms of potential opportunities for U.S. business in the infrastructure. That's just an example.
Thank you.
I have a question, I think, for the three people representing South American countries or perspectives. Ambassador Hammer, you mentioned that Chile sees itself as a bridge between the Atlantic and the Pacific. Obviously, three of the countries that are here are part of Mercosur, and there is a tension now between Mercosur and its future as a trade bloc versus the Pacific Alliance and the TPP, and there's a kind of a tendency to look at sort of like the good guys and the bad guys in terms of approaches to openness and free trade. And I was wondering if you could comment from the perspectives of your countries, of Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile, as to how those, and Brazil as well, how those trade relationships and new opportunities presented by the Pacific integration schemes are affecting the way countries of South America see their regional, if not global, insertion. So perhaps, Mike, if you want to take a first crack at that?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I mean, Chile is very well positioned, obviously being in the Pacific Alliance and reaching out to Mercosur to do the bridging. And from the very beginning of the Bachelet administration, Foreign Minister Munoz has been on the lead in trying to certainly promote greater cooperation, integration to the extent that it's possible. And it's a positive, absolutely. I mean, at the same time, of course, Chile is taking advantage of a great opportunity in the Trans-Pacific Partnership to be, and continue to be a leading free trading nation. I believe they're the nation with the most, and Ambassador Valdez can correct me if I'm wrong, but with the most free trade agreements, and he was head of the trade department there at the ministry. But with over, I think it's 24 agreements that reached 60 countries. But what is important is that it's not a question of the good guys or the bad guys, or there are obviously different approaches. But from the U.S. perspective, we want to encourage, of course, free trade, greater cooperation for the benefit of all. And I think what it's clearly been demonstrated that trade does provide a win-win situation. We've seen in the U.S.-Chile bilateral trade agreement that's now 12 years old, and that has increased bilateral trade by over 300%, and which has helped create jobs not only in Chile but in the United States. And so, again, I think Chile has shown quite a fair amount of leadership in wanting to be inclusive, and really I defer to my colleagues in the other countries as to how they see the process, but certainly from the U.S. perspective, again, the greater cooperation, the better, and hopefully, again, it's something that will continue to evolve in a positive direction, because I think, again, the trade agenda has shown very positive results, certainly for the countries that have been most progressive in advancing free trade.
Mm-hmm. Brad, is Uruguay trapped now with the recession in Brazil and its position within Mercosur?
Well, I mean, Brazil is very much preoccupied with its own internal issues, but Argentina is a tremendous opportunity, and the visit of President Macri to Uruguay was very positive and resulted in very quickly resolving some of the outstanding bilateral issues. So, I mean, there's a natural, I'm speculating here, but there seems to be a natural partnership developing there within Mercosur toward more open trade and more open, toward reforming Mercosur and bringing it kind of back to what its original intent was. Mm-hmm. Uruguay, because of its relatively open economy, has been called a Pacific country on the Atlantic coast. Mm-hmm. But they're also they are committed to Mercosur. They're not going to walk away from Mercosur. They're committed to working within Mercosur to bring it back, to make it more effective as a customs union. But they're also very interested in exploring what possibilities TPP might offer once it's been ratified by the original members and perhaps opened up for new members. So that's we get a lot of questions about that, but it's like in any country. It's a domestic political issue as well. So opening the economy and showing everything you got. There's opposition among labor unions to free trade regimes. So just as there is in the United States. So it's interesting because they're having that discussion now. They're in the midst of with Uruguay, are we going to be part of a transatlantic or a trans-Pacific agreement or not? That's stay tuned.
Mm-hmm. Alex?
Well, actually, I think I would echo a lot what Brad has said, because I think with the new government in Argentina, you will have a government that is very committed to Mercosur, but basically trying to figure out how to make Mercosur more relevant and an engine of growth as opposed to kind of a political grouping. And so we'll have to see how that plays out. But I think it will greatly facilitate efforts, probably continue to be led by Chile, to try to bridge and find connective tissue between the Pacific Alliance and the Mercosur. one of the things, as I mentioned in my presentation, that the new government is doing is supporting Mercosur's negotiations with the EU. And that is a very positive development. In the past, Argentina was kind of the holdout and kind of slowing things down.
No pun intended, right?
And so I think this support will basically facilitate reconceptualization, not just in Argentina, but in Mercosur altogether, on how to engage, how to insert Mercosur in the kind of emerging global economy as they look around and you see TTIP on one side and TPP on another. I think Mercosur has a major challenge in front of it. And I think the new Argentine government realizes that, but wants to see it as an opportunity.
Okay, we have time for questions. I know we're on a, sure, I'm sorry, Lily,
Can I just mention
forward.
Brazil,
Please,
because
please,
Brazil
please,
has
please.
has
Yep.
had, and those who have followed Brazil over time, the free trade agreements, it's not something that was an easy topic to discuss. What has happened is when the TPP was announced, there was a total shift. It coincided with the economy deteriorating, and all of a sudden, we're getting all these voices of key interlocutors, the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Commerce, saying, wait a minute, we've been left out. What is this? Can we talk about it? And so what we have right now is an opportunity to discuss these trade issues, and in a way that we've not had it. A little late, but we're trying to take advantage of this opening, including, that's why the Minister of Commerce and the Minister of Foreign Affairs are coming in at the end of the month to elevate the discussions on trade, which is something that had not happened before. And also, they see the whole change in Mercosur with the shift in Argentina as a very, as an opportunity, finally, to see something that will come out of it. They're particularly enthusiastic about the possibilities of the agreement with the EU. And so there's a sense of relief that some of the ideology has been taken out of that forum. So that's been very...
Cindy, let me just add one thing that Ambassador Ayalde, because of her position, is not allowed to say, but I can, which is there is an increasing acknowledgement in Brazil by members of political parties, by the leadership, by the business community that favored protectionism. Brazil is a protectionist country traditionally because the business community favored that. This has shift. Now there is an increasing recognition that Brazil is pretty isolated in trade terms because Brazil opted for isolation. And that has to change. So, and if you add to that what we saw in Brazilian streets last Sunday, and pay attention to the numbers, 3.4 million people.
Historic.
Yes, came out in 262 cities in a remarkable, peaceful demonstration, a cry against corruption, for democracy under the rule of law. I believe it is probably one of the largest public manifestations of this kind anywhere in the world. So there is a new dynamic there, and that is probably what's going to drive the dialogue, including on Brazil-U.S. relations. As on that, just a little advertisement, when Ambassador Hammer talks about Chile really betting on cooperation in the science area. We have at the Brazil Institute bet on this for the last 5 years. Next week, we are bringing 10 members of the Brazilian Congress, including 2 senators, to Stanford University for one more of our Brazilian congressional study groups on innovation. We have been to MIT, King's College, London, University of California, San Diego, here at the center and at the State Department. And The following 2 weeks, we will be at University of Michigan and University of Ohio with delegation of Brazilian scientists from the São Paulo Science Foundation. So there is something that goes, you know, why we face the crisis in Brazil. Brazilian society is expressing and continues to express its desire to engage with the United States, with scientists, with innovators. Actually, our seminar in California next week, which will involve Google, also will take place at the Lehman Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and Education, which is a center that exists at the University of Stanford. So just to give an idea, the crisis is the crisis and will be solved. But the people-to-people connections, the society-to-societies connection, are pretty much alive, and they are in both countries.
Okay, we have some time for questions. Please raise your hand. We'll take a couple of them. Wait for the microphone. I see former Ambassador to Chile, Craig Kelly.
Thank you, Cynthia. Great comments by the entire panel, especially the comments on the intra-regional dynamics, which are really interesting. I want to pick up on something Ambassador Hammer said about, LNG coming in from Trinidad and Tobago, being regasified in Chile and sent on to Argentina. Three of us in this corner of the room, Ambassador Way and Tim Stater and I, were serving in the region when the gas stopped flowing from Argentina to Chile. So this is really an extraordinary development. I wonder if you could comment on the effect on relations, you and Alex Lee, effect on relations between the two countries. How is this being received in Argentina, Alex? And any other comments about the bilateral relationship in light of the new energy relationship? Thanks.
Great. We'll probably take a couple together and then come back to the panel. Any other hands? If not, we'll address gas. As we remember, Argentina cut it off to Chile, causing great deal of consternation throughout that country.
Well, I only mentioned that, in fact, to highlight, again, the bullishness on the part of Chile and enthusiasm for the new Macri government and the potential and very dynamic change that is taking place, which is good for not only their bilateral relationship but also for the hemisphere. And whether it's on the energy front and the linkages that are being explored in terms of tunnels and other connectivity between Argentina and Chile is just something very exciting to be seen. But also, as I mentioned, the potential now deployment, excuse me, of the Cruz del Sur, whether it's to Colombia or elsewhere. But it's something that you can feel. It's palpable in terms of the way that this relationship, which had been previously strained and had struggled in some regard, now unleashes a great number of opportunities. And so, from where I sit, and I'm sure if Noe were here, we've talked a little bit about this. He certainly sees it on his end as well. But I'll let Alex sort of address it from there.
Okay, I would basically say that the new government has been able to establish really positive relations with all of its immediate neighbors. It's really kind of remarkable. And I'll let Brad talk about some of the examples with Uruguay, which we've noticed, and the Uruguayans certainly have noticed and celebrated the different relationship and the constructiveness. But since no one from Paraguay is up on here, I will also add that the Paraguayans are very happy with the new government, and there have been, some modest areas of collaboration in which, important to the Paraguayans, that they also feel very optimistic. How Argentina's energy matrix that is attracting so much attention from outside will play regionally, I'm not the best person to talk about. But it is clear that the new government sees energy, whether it's the traditional fossil fuels or the renewables or the unconventionals, as a major platform for growth, and I can only assume that this will lead to discussions with the neighbors. But Brad?
Well, when President Macri's first trip abroad was to Anchorena, which is the presidential retreat in Uruguay, the reports were that within the first 20 minutes they had resolved the major bilateral issues, including the issue of the pulp mills, the Uruguayan pulp mills on the Rio Uruguay, which are an environmental issue, but more, I think it's fair to say, an issue that was fanned by the previous Argentine government for political reasons, and resulted in the cutting off of the bridges between Argentina and Uruguay. It was in my view, a classic distraction. That issue was resolved in a very technical way. The energy issue also came up. Uruguay had plans and still has plans to build an LNG regasification plant, a liquid natural gas terminal. Unfortunately, the prime contractor was OAS from Brazil, and so the project kind of fell into limbo. At this meeting with President Macri, the two presidents agreed, because Argentina would be the primary customer for gas that came in through this terminal. The two presidents agreed to move ahead on the LNG terminal, which may present an opportunity for U.S. contractors. Certainly presents an opportunity for U.S. Gulf Coast gas exporters. So.
Sure. It does truly bend the mind that Argentina, the country with the second largest gas reserves in the world, is importing gas from another country like Chile that has struggled to solve its own energy needs. Do we have one more question? If not, I'm going to jump in and ask about Venezuela. Okay, sorry.
Thank you. Chen Weilan from Georgetown. Just one question. Do you see any signs of a change in the healthcare system in the South American region recently, because due to the Zika or another reason? Thank you.
Okay, and perhaps since I started with that, putting Venezuela on the table, obviously Macri has really made not only a bold sort of change of position of the Argentine government, but has also taken the lead within the hemisphere on speaking out about democracy and human rights in Venezuela. Where is the rest of the region as they look towards this economic and political and humanitarian crisis in Venezuela? So let's have, if we could, maybe a minute and a half to close from each person. I think we're a little bit over our time limit, and given the transportation challenges in Washington today, I don't want to make you late for your next meeting. Alex, why don't we start with you?
Okay, well, we very, very much welcomed President Macri basically taking this on. He was essentially the first sitting president to take this on, take the challenge on, and make a forceful stand in the region, calling out kind of the anti-democratic actions of the Venezuelan government. What I think this is the way it's going to get expressed by Argentina is primarily support to reinvigorate the OAS, to reinvigorate the inter-American human rights system, to reinvigorate the mechanisms of that system regionally that have been somewhat on a defensive regionally. But I think with Argentina, that will embolden other countries, particularly in the Southern Cone, but not necessarily, who have had concerns about the trajectory, the political trajectory of Venezuela, and are certainly alarmed by the economic downward spiral of the country. But I think in Argentina's case, it will probably get expressed through the OAS mechanism.
I would say that, well, first off, Uruguay is never going to be leading the charge on this issue. It's a small country, but it's a classic mediator, a classic consensus builder. So I think what we'll see from Uruguay is a commitment to peaceful and democratic evolution of Venezuela, and certainly everybody wants to avoid a crisis or violence of any kind. Everybody recognizes that the economic situation is deteriorating. So the Uruguayans are seized, but they're not doing it in a public way. They're working as they were working as President pro tem of UNASUR, particularly on the election observation or accompaniment mission, to ensure that that was as successful as possible. They're now President pro tem of Mercosur, and they'll continue to work quietly to bridge differences, and that's what Uruguay has traditionally seen its role as. Also, I'd note that the current Frente Amplio government is somewhat divided on its approach toward Venezuela. But that the Vasquez administration came out early on and stated its support for democracy and human rights in Venezuela, which sent some shockwaves through some of the more dogmatic elements of their coalition.
First, I want to say go Hoyas. There's another Hoya in the crowd. Ben Chang's over there, so good to see Georgetown well represented in any forum. Chile's position is not very dissimilar to that of Uruguay. They're very interested in trying to promote a mediation potential, and have offered so to the Maduro government, working with the opposition. Unfortunately, it has not taken fruit, but working within the UNASUR context to try to see what can be done, because there is great concern that the situation in Venezuela continues to deteriorate. But again, I would just echo much of what Brad said applies to Chile, and certainly they would like to see a better path forward and encourage that in as much as it's possible.
In the case of Brazil, it's been an issue that we've been talking with Brazil for quite some time. We saw it differently initially. I think more recently, I think there's more coming meeting of the minds in terms of the issues and consensus that we dialogue is needed, and Brazil has preferred to take an approach through UNASUR. However, in the more recent months, they have become more vocal, something that we have that we're very pleased to see, because we see Brazil as an important player in this issue, and we have wanted to see Brazil much more vocal and dynamic, openly, rather than this more quiet backroom diplomacy. So some of the statements that they've made are wouldn't have been there in the past. So I think this is part of the shift that Paulo was mentioning. It's also happening on the political agenda.
Thank you to our distinguished representatives in Brazil, Chile, Uruguay, the State Department. Thank you for joining us, for struggling across town to be here physically. Thank you all those who have joined the webcast. Please join me in a round of applause for our distinguished ambassadors.